All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and then if people come in, they can trickle in. The first part is just an introduction anyway. So this is tech tips to enhance classroom learning. So an introduction, I'm Nicole Cronauer. This is my 6th year teaching. I taught 3rd grade for 2 years at Holy Cross Lutheran in Indianapolis. And then I've taught at St. Peter's in Columbus, Indiana for the last 4 years, 2 years in 4th grade, 2 years in 5th grade, just doing social studies and discipleship. I keep joking that at the end of this year I'm probably going to get moved since I've just been doing 2 years at a time in a grade level. So who knows, maybe I'll be in 6th grade next year. I'll just keep working my way up. I'm level 2 Google certified, and I completed Tech 21. So I really like learning about technology. I'm sure part of it is I grew up with technology, and that's just kind of been part of my schooling. But I do enjoy learning about it, and sometimes just try out things to see what kind of happens. And then that's my husband with me, and this is from when we went to Iceland over the summer, and one of my favorite hikes that we did when we were over in Iceland. So as we go through the presentation, if you see the star emoji next to a resource, it means one I've used in my classroom or I plan to use this year. Some resources are better probably for certain grade levels, but I don't tend to label them in the slides just because it might spark an idea. And sometimes, I know I'm guilty of this, of like if it's labeled 4th grade but I teach 5th grade, I'm like, well, that's for 4th grade and I teach 5th grade. And I know that each state is kind of different on their standards and all that. So I haven't really labeled anything with the thought that if you're interested, you can kind of look at it and maybe think, oh, I could modify it in this way for what I'm doing in my role. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable are you using technology in the classroom? You can just hold up how comfortable. Okay, so most of us are fairly comfortable, and that's probably why you picked this session. The people that are probably not comfortable probably chose a different session because they were like, nope, I'm not interested. So on the agenda, I have it linked within my slides so that if you saw something and you're like, oh, I wanted to learn more about that, you can just skip to it in the slides. The agenda or the slides are posted in the description on the app. So if you want to go back later, look at anything more in depth, revisit anything, you can do that later. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is Pear Deck. Initially, when I did this at the Best Practices in Frankenmuth, I had the slide set up as a Pear Deck, and I thought everyone was going to have their computers and we could do it in a Pear Deck form. And then that was not the case at Frankenmuth, so I changed it because I was going to show you real time what Pear Deck looks like and the different features. But it's using Google Slides. And you can make it so that all of the kids are either on the same slide at you at the same time. So it's kind of like if you've ever done a Kahoot where you have the code up on the board, they go to a website, they type in the code, and then they pull up the slide deck. And you can either turn it on teacher paced, where they're all on the same slide as you at the same time, or you can turn on student paced, where they're allowed to go through the slides. So I like using Pear Deck because I can kind of control what slide they're on, because I find with my 5th graders, sometimes they're just clicking, scrolling through. They're not really paying attention to what we're on. But it's also nice because then the kids have the slides right in front of them and they can see it. So like if there's a picture, my front row kids often can see the picture in really good detail, but my kids in the back can't necessarily. So then if I'm showing different like images or we're looking at details of something, it's really accessible to all of my students. And Pear Deck not only controls that, but you can also insert in questions. So there is a free version as well as a paid version. In the free version, students can do text responses, they can do multiple choice, they can insert a number, and you can also link them to a website so that it still stays within Pear Deck, but they can explore on a website if you kind of want to make sure that they're on the certain website, or take them directly to it so that you don't have to have them type in or go somewhere else and find a separate link. On the premium version, when I got a quote earlier, it was $149.99 a year for an individual teacher. There are other prices if your whole school would be interested in it, but I also know that Lutheran schools don't tend to have a lot of funding, and it might not be everyone's cup of tea, so that's why I just put the individual price on there, and the price would change based on the number of subscriptions. But there's also drawing responses, so for your younger kids who maybe aren't as adept at typing, they could draw in responses. You can see student progress in real time with the paid version, so you can see them typing their answers, and you could see what what students are doing, so that you can kind of check in with student progress. You can respond to students' answers, so if someone had a really good response or was off task, you can address it without even going across the room, talking to that person. You can just kind of send them a comment back. You can also see the responses and star certain ones, so maybe you want to show really interesting examples. You could star certain ones and only show certain answers with the premium version, whereas with the free version you would show all of them, which, you know, you run the risk of certain kids taking that the wrong way, so that is something to keep in mind depending on what you want to do with Pear Deck.
How do you see their answers to like the multiple choice questions
So
from your side?
there's two different ways. So if you're doing the free version, you just hit a button and it'll show how many students answered it. If you have the premium version, you can also get, I believe it's only with the premium version, you can get a spreadsheet at the end showing what students answered for each question, and so you can kind of get that data at the end as well. But with the premium version, I think you can also see it on your teacher dashboard and see who answered which answer. It syncs with Google Classroom, and it posts students' responses or their notes to Google Classroom as well. So if you use Google Classroom, it has that integration that you can use. You can also, I already mentioned that, of selecting and hiding student responses, and I included a video tutorial that I found online for anyone who wants to kind of see it in action. And then I do have a short video that Pear Deck produced as well to show you. So Pear Deck is something that I used a lot with one unit that I had at the beginning of the year. I found a digital citizenship curriculum that used a lot of Pear Deck with it. I use it pretty infrequently now, but my kids really enjoy it because there's that interactive feature with it. They're not just sitting and listening to me. So especially for classrooms where you do a lot of Google Slides, I think it would be very beneficial. If you don't tend to use Google Slides, I don't think that it would be as beneficial, just because it is a higher cost, especially if you're doing the premium, and it does take a little bit of learning just the first time or two for the kids to get to Pear Deck, and for you to teach them kind of the different features with it. But my kids really have enjoyed it. Yeah.
Is it also like that where other teachers can like post like slides on topics, or is it?
Yeah. So
Create your own.
you can find other ones, and they have some templates that you can use already, so you can find some. I didn't really delve much into that. The one curriculum I found had some on there, but I'm not sure if there are specific websites that you could use that like have a bunch that you could like kind of look through. And it's just an extension you could get in your Google Slides to add on and use. Yeah.
Does Pear Deck lock down the machine so a student is only on Pear Deck, or can a kid go research their favorite football team while teacher thinks they're all on Pear Deck?
I don't think it locks down their machine. We have a separate program that we use called Securely to screen monitor, and so I typically have that up on my computer anyway, and my kids are very aware of that because I just sent an email back home this morning. I was like, hey, this kid was playing math games during my social studies time yesterday, which he knows he's not supposed to do. And so my kids are very aware that I check that regularly, so for the most part I don't tend to have as many problems because we have another software that does that, and I regularly will call out students who are not doing what they're supposed to. But I don't think it locks down.
They're engaging in it and they're answering questions, that they can't really go somewhere else because you'll know if they're not answering.
Yeah, so there's that part too. And like I said, my kids really enjoy it and they like using the program. So I've not had a negative student reaction to using Pear Deck. And part of it is I don't use it all the time. And with a lot of the stuff I do, I don't tend to do it every single day because I have some things that I use and kind of use regularly, but I don't tend to do the same thing over and over again because I want it to stay fresh and I don't want them to get bored of the same thing. The next one is an odd one out. This is something that you could use without technology, or students don't have to have their own device necessarily, but you can have students look at pictures, math problems, words, or other material and decide which one they think is the odd one out. Typically there's no right or wrong answer as long as they can justify. It depends on what you're doing, but it requires students to access higher levels of thinking. It can be done through a Google Slide set if you want students to write down their justification. It could be through Pear Deck. You could have them have an index card and maybe write down their answer and why, or use whiteboards and have them hold up their answer. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in a one-to-one classroom. So this is one that I use in my classroom. We do a big unit about Native Americans, and so then after we've learned about several different tribes, I have this slide deck set up, and it goes through different areas. So this slide focuses on housing, and it has actually that's mislabeled. But it has 3 different tribes housing, and so they have to tell me which one is the odd one out and why. So they're taking the information we learned as well as using the pictures and telling me which one they think doesn't belong in between these 3 and why. And so I've had students that have said that the first one is the odd one out because they use bricks and the other ones don't, and that they are a little bit more sturdy and look more like our houses. I've had other ones say that the middle one is the odd one out because there are no walls, and there's the posts that hold it up higher. And so like the students have to then come up with different reasons. So like with the odd one out, this slide deck, there's one on housing, there's clothing, there's transportation, there's food. So I cover a variety of topics, and it requires the students to do those higher levels of thinking, and uses the knowledge that we've learned throughout the unit to kind of summarize it. You could do one for science, which is a picture of a different biome. And so then you could have students take a look at them, or maybe you focus on the different animals. Which animal wouldn't live in the Arctic? And so then there would be a right and wrong answer with something like this, but it's still requiring the students to take the knowledge that you've given them and use it. Or this one with just numbers. So maybe you want them to think a little deeper. And with this one, you could probably justify why maybe any one of them are the odd one out. Maybe you could say the 9 is the odd one out because it's the only single digit and the rest of them are double digits. Or you could say the 9 is the odd one out because it's not divisible by 5 and the other ones are divisible by 5. Or maybe you could say the 30 is the odd one out because it is divisible by 6 and the rest of them aren't divisible by 6, right? So you're not putting a lot to it, and then the students could have conversations with each other and could see how there's different points of view, but it's also requiring them to use kind of their math sense as well. Or you could do different problems. They could have to maybe solve the problem and figure out which one is the odd one out. You could do it with maybe literary character. So which character is not like the others? Which character is the odd one out from these characters from Harry Potter? Is it Hermione, Luna, Tonks, McGonagall? And then they have to explain why. So you could maybe do a specific book that you covered and have students explain that as well. Online notebooks. So you could use Google Slides or something similar to organize all resources or work for a unit or a smaller study. Or make it a year-long resource so students can see how everything you use connects to each other. It reduces the number of posts possibly on Google Classroom. So like last year when I did my Native American unit, I made a separate post for each Native American tribe with the resources for students to use. This year I just made a Google Slides deck, and I had all of the links in that one Google Slides deck so students knew where to go every single time. I didn't have to remember to post everything, and then there wasn't as much for them to scroll through and for it to get lost in, because I found that the year before there would be so many posts between the homework assignments and the resources that they would have to scroll a bit and they'd be like, I can't find it, and would just kind of give up. Whereas with this time, they knew it was the resource to go to. And I'll show that in just a second. They can also use Control F, which is the shortcut for the finding feature, to then search through the resource if they're looking for a certain word. If it's a teacher copy that students are viewing, you can update and add to it as you go. So maybe a link doesn't work anymore, or a student's like, hey, I actually found this other resource that gave me a lot of information. Then you could maybe add it to yours as well. Cons, if there are a lot of pictures, GIFs, videos, etc. and it may take a while for students to load. I know on our student devices there is not a lot of memory on them, and so if they have a lot of pictures downloaded and they're trying to load something that takes up a lot of memory, it really slows down their device and doesn't load as much. So you'd have to be kind of careful about what you put in. Oops, wrong way. So then I have several different links to examples, and I'll have to go back and forth because I want to show kind of what I'm talking about. So for online notebooks, this is an example of the Native American one that I made for my students. So I have the table of contents at the beginning. I have the maps showing where the tribes live so they can kind of see that. I have all of the names of the tribes linked that will take them to the specific slide so they don't have to click forever. I also put the slides in order of the ones that we were covering. So the ones that we covered first are near the beginning, and the ones that we covered later were further down. And then as you go through, I have the videos that I showed them in class so that they could re-watch them. Or if students are absent, I could say, hey, you need to go watch the 2 videos about the ancestral Pueblans on our online resource. So then they could go look at that. And then same thing, I have information about like our username and password for BrainPop so they could watch the video, links to other websites they could use, and it just kind of keeps going on. And so that was really helpful this year with my unit, so that I didn't have 15 different posts on Google Classroom. I had one post, and it was all stuff that I was already using, but I just kind of assembled it into one place. And it's helpful for me too, because then I don't have to look all through my lesson plans to find all of my stuff that I used. Let me close, go to the next one. This is another teacher at our school. I think she got the template from someone else, but it's a little house. So students can go to this slide and it goes to the different content areas. And then she has pictures linked, and this is for her the whole year. So she has all of her different science resources. There's readings to do, activities, social studies. It's divided into unit, math divided into units or topics. Discipleship. So she has all sorts of things in here that students can go and look through, and they can use this all year. And she works with 3rd graders, so then it's a little bit more condensed. They don't have to go to as many different areas when navigating stuff online. This is an online notebook that was created for the Indiana District Initiative. Indiana Curriculum. No, I'm going out of order. Indiana District Curriculum Initiative. There we go. And the Indiana District had worked on creating almost like a map, a whole curriculum map for every grade level, 1st grade through 8th grade for social studies. It was something that our curriculum director was trying out. And so they created this online interactive notebook for I think this one's the 6th grade unit. So they have a timeline on there with the different units to kind of help students see how the entire year connects together. And then they have the unit title on there. They have information like people, so that they could put the important people from the unit, places and events, cultural achievements, my faith in this unit, so integrating faith connections. And so that way the students could see how everything from the year connected to each other. So instead of it being, we covered this unit, we covered this unit, we covered this unit, students could see how it all connects.
So the students have access to add to this?
So with this one, the students would each have a copy of it, and then they would update it and maintain it throughout the year, yeah. With my Native American one, I just had a teacher copy. Yeah.
So with that, like, how do you have them just turn it in on Google Classroom, like for checks?
I'm not sure how they manage this one. I've done similar things where I've had students regularly turn it in and I check it. I've not necessarily had a whole year-long thing, but you could also do where they just share it with you, and you could add a shortcut to your drive and look at it.
So I use Google Classroom, and one problem with things like this, like for writing, I have them like, oh, use a Google Doc.
Oh, and it locks it. Yeah.
Like, do you have a way to get around that, or are they making copies forever? Or?
So one of the things that I've done is if it's like a collaborative project is if they can turn in the link on the private comments, so then you could click on the link. It's just that you have to remind them to share it with you, because when they add it on Google Classroom, it'll automatically give you access as a teacher, but when they put the link in the private comments, it won't do that, so I have to kind of remind my 5th graders pretty regularly. But we've gotten far enough in the year that they are more familiar with it, and most of them are pretty good when they know they have to turn it in, that they are sharing it with me, so I have that access to it.
Just don't attach it as
Yes. Yeah. So if you don't attach it and you put the link in the private comments, it won't lock the document up. Now, granted, you might run into students who are still trying to edit it past when it's due and putting the link in there before they're actually done, which is why Google Classroom chooses to lock the stuff. But if it's not something like it's a hard deadline, you're just kind of checking progress, then that would be a way to work around that. And then there's some other resources as well on there that you can look at a different time. There's also some templates as well, so if you want to create something, you can look at those. Jamboard, it's a Google product, just like Slides and Docs and Sheets and all of that, but it's very simplistic in the design. So especially if you work with the younger grades, it is very easy for the younger grades to understand as compared to the other Google products. So I've got a GIF going to kind of show how to access Jamboard. But as you can see, there's not a lot of tools on it, so it's very simple for younger grades to use. Now, it does not work well with Google Classroom. So with a lot of things on Google Classroom, when students turn them in, you can see pretty much the whole thing without having to open it. But with Jamboard, it'll only show you the very first slide, essentially, of Jamboard. It won't show you the rest of them. So I don't use it a ton because of that, because I use Google Classroom so much, but if you're just wanting the kids to kind of try out different things or use Google products in a smaller way, it's very beneficial for that. So one of the resources, here we go. So like this is for the younger grades. It has like the magnet tiles. You know, if you don't necessarily want to have a set for every single kid, you could just have them use this so that they're still doing the magnetic letters and kind of moving stuff around, but you don't necessarily have to have a set for everybody. Or if you're doing another version of online learning, which I know no one gets super excited to talk about, but if there is another time of online learning, you could use it for that. They also have like the lined paper on there if you wanted students to just practice writing with their finger. I used it for a activity where they had to pick where they would build their city. We were talking about the early colonization, and it was a worksheet that I just kind of slightly tweaked. But this way, it was all hidden, so they couldn't see stuff ahead of time. So we had kind of talked about like, okay, if you knew where the water was, where would you build your city on the map? And so then they kind of put a dot somewhere on the city based on where the rivers, lakes, and the ocean was. And then when they clicked the next arrow, they got different information. Now they found out the elevation. Are you going to keep your city in the same spot, or are you going to change it? And so with Jamboard, they can't see the slides coming up next, so it kind of hid it. But once again, I have to open that in a completely different tab and click through, which is not as convenient. But I had the stuff hidden then, so I couldn't necessarily see it. Let's see here. Nope. Digital choice boards, so similar to the paper ones, where students have a variety of options to pick from. You're just taking a paper choice board and you're making it digital. So I have one that I used for exploration. So I remember doing a couple of these when I was a student, where you could pick between different projects at the end of a unit. Sometimes you just pick one, sometimes you might have to pick a certain number of them, earning up to a certain total number of points, trying to have a variety of learning styles on it. With this one, I created it for a unit that we were doing all virtually in 2020, so I have a lot of extra stuff with it that I probably wouldn't have done if we were in person, like videos walking them through every single step and templates and all those things that I would have probably in person just pulled groups to the side and said, okay, if you're doing this project, come here, let me talk really fast. But I have a description of the project, and then they can click on this and drop down to the page with the information. So there's a rubric for each one that they can see. There's templates that they can use and more details about the project. I tried to use a variety of learning styles so that students who had a variety of interests, could find something that they were more interested in. Some of the projects don't hardly get picked, but sometimes you'll have like one kid out of all 53 of them that they are really excited to do that one. So I kind of leave a variety on there. So like this one, they could write a newspaper article, they could create a timeline of the events we covered, they could make a picture book, they could create a test and be the teacher. A lot of my kids this year really loved that one. They loved like being the teacher and creating a fake test for their classmates. And they got to use Google Forms for that one. They could design a game. So some of the kids put a lot of effort in, and they loved like making their own game board and the dice and coloring it and all that sort of stuff and coming up with the questions. They could create a map using Google My Maps. They could pretend that they owned a souvenir shop and create souvenirs to represent the unit and explain how the souvenirs connected. They could create a game called Who Am I, where they would give a description of an explorer and people could guess which one it was, and you could use videos with that. And then create a pros and cons list of, and then a writing one, creating a pros and cons list of the European explorers' actions at the time. And then they had to give me their opinion of whether they thought the age of exploration was a good thing or a bad thing. Yes?
The nice thing about the Jamboard, or not the Jamboard, the choice board, is it gives the kids, obviously, what word am I going to say? Choices.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an assumption that your kids know how to do all of these different type of activities.
Yeah.
The advantage with the choice board, especially if you're working with your tech teacher or librarian or whoever a partner could be, is that they can be that additional tech resource to help the kids figure it out.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I took a lot of ideas from what other teachers had done, because especially with the age of exploration, that's one that other grade levels cover, other states cover. So I just kind of had looked around online to see what are some like cumulative sort of projects that other teachers had done, and then I modified it to fit my grade level and what my students already had the knowledge of. So like I kind of tweaked it for that. And you don't have to necessarily give 9 choices. You could give 4 choices. You could give 3 choices. You know, you could modify it to fit your comfort level and what your students have used before. Because my students regularly use a lot of the Google products, so they already knew how to make a My Map from our Native American unit. They'd made a Google form before for something else that we've done. They use Screencastify every once in a while. So they've used a lot of these products elsewhere, and so that's why I put it in this where I wasn't controlling the situation, because I'd already introduced them elsewhere in the year. There's obviously still going to be questions because they're 5th graders, and it wasn't like we had just done it the day before, but I'd kind of already done the introduction part. I don't think I would put a brand new thing in a choice board that they've never done, just because it requires a lot from me then to help that group of people or single student who's using that, and then I can't necessarily check in with my other students since it is an independent thing. There is this website that I found that has a bunch of examples already. So if it's something that you're interested in, you could take a look at this. So there's science examples, math examples.
Was that linked in your?
Yes, it's linked in the Google Slides. Math, ELA, social studies, and then other various examples. And so, or multiple content areas. So there's a variety of ways that you could use it, and I would recommend, if it's something that you're thinking about, just taking a look at some of the things that other people have done, and then kind of letting that, okay, they did it like this, but I could modify it, because that's what I typically do with a lot of the stuff. And then, this is a Civil War choice board that somebody had made for upper grades that I just found and had a lot of detail to it. So it kind of goes into more. And I think that they use the same symbols maybe throughout to kind of represent what they're doing. Oh yeah, here's the links to the different ones. So the examples by content area one, that's where the big list is of different ones. And then there's some for Seesaw as well. Bentos, so this was inspired by the bento boxes that originated in Japan but have become popular in the United States. You could use actual physical objects, or you could use digital images to create a visual display of learning. The dots are in the example. It's because students have excluded an explanation in ThingLink, which is right here. So this is the one for reading. So they read the book Raymond's Run, and then they created this image with different items to represent different parts of the story. So ambitions and dreams, and then this is an older student that gives a lot of explanation and a link on it, and it kind of goes through and explains why the different pictures are included in the bento. I've done one before with social studies. So they had to learn about different influential Native Americans. They were split into groups. I have the instructions on one slide with all the different Native Americans that they could learn about. And then they had this example or this template they went through, and then they answered these 6 questions from their research, and then they included a picture to connect to the answer to their question. Students like it because they get to look up fun pictures to include or GIFs and include those as well. And then I have the students meet with their group that they all worked on this with and share their learning with the group. So that way they can kind of hear what some of the other influential people were. And I did this with influential people in Jamestown too. Yeah.
Something like this, like, I know my kids can get carried away, like, looking for images.
Yes.
Like, how was this, like, how many class periods did this take?
I just did 1 class period, so most of 1 class period was spent. And then I typically, with something like this, might give, depending on what we're doing the next day, I might give them an extra night to work on it too, just because sometimes the students' internet at home might be really slow if they're looking for a lot of images, because it takes a while to load. So I might give them 2 nights, but we only spend 1 day in class working on it. Yeah. But we did another one of these, and the kids have really liked it, and then they've kind of taken the information afterwards. They're like, oh yeah, so-and-so, that's who I researched for my history bento, and they did this, and they'll kind of remember it later on. And they've really enjoyed it. I've only done 2 so far, because that was something that I learned about over the summer. Oh yeah, that's another thing. There's also links on here as well. The one that I saw originally was about muckrakers from a high school teacher that included that. And then I have 2 templates linked at the bottom. So if it's something that you're wanting to create your own, I had found these templates online that you could use to make your own without having to set up the whole Google Slides, because I know a lot of times that intimidates some teachers and they're not as interested. HyperDocs. So it's a digital lesson plan, provides access to materials in one organized place. It can be a Google Slide, it can be a Google Doc, but it asks students to use the 4 C's: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. Students go through the following steps in most HyperDocs: engage, explore, explain, apply, share, reflect, and extend the learning. They're most popular on Google Slides, but you can use a variety of platforms. And then I have templates and examples linked. There's also a Facebook group where they love to share HyperDocs. So if you are looking for a HyperDoc on something, you could probably just post in there and say, hey, does anyone have a HyperDoc for this book or this unit? And a lot of times someone might have already created one and they'll be willing to share it. And I've taken others' HyperDocs and modified them, because maybe I was like, well, I don't really want to use that resource, or that might be a little too mature for my students, and I can modify it to fit my own needs by making a copy. There's links on here to different ones that I've done. One that I just finished using with my kids is this church work HyperDoc. So I wanted to talk to my kids about church work and just kind of introduce them to the concept. So I created this resource, which I'm hoping with the new campaign that they're getting ready to run, that I'll get some updated resources, because like the maps have 3 schools on them that are no longer open. So I'm hoping to get some updated resources for my students as they explore church work. But it goes through the different stages and just kind of puts all of the resources in one place. So sometimes we'll do this as a whole class and we'll watch the videos together and we'll talk about it. Sometimes it'll be students independently working on it. I created this once again when we were doing remote learning, and so there's a lot of extra stuff that I probably wouldn't have done had we all been together, like me reading the directions to the students. Had we been in person, I just would have worked with those students who might needed the directions read to them, but they're on here because of that. I just don't want everyone to think I do that for every single thing I create.
That's different than a Google slide? As you were saying before, you put a lot of stuff into the Google Slides. Is it?
Yeah. So with this, there are questions in here and all the resources, and it is very similar to Google Slides, but a lot of times people just use Google Slides for a presentation thing like this. They don't always make them interactive or like a student journal. So it's similar in that way. It just depends on how you're using Google Slides, really. But there's questions for them to answer, there's readings, there's links to resources, like these pictures are links to different resources for students to go through. I included symbols so that they knew, like, hey, right here's a question. I'll probably modify this a little bit because I found that sometimes students wouldn't always see the question even with the symbol, so I'm probably going to look at modifying that next year, making it easier for them to find the spots where they're answering questions, because that was kind of something that I noticed this year as they went through it. But we just finished this unit, so I haven't got a chance to do that yet. This is another one for government for 4th graders, so it has links to different sections. Once again, the resources are in there. There's activities for them to do in the middle of it to kind of explain their learning.
And Nicole, what do you think too, like the whole HyperDoc thing? I think our middle school loves HyperDocs because they put everything that they're going to teach. So they don't have to go dig it up and find it. It's all, everything's right there. But kind of the PR of the original one was that you had so much in there that you would never use it all, but if kids were really interested and that's what you're hoping for, you could go deeper into it.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the difference. But that's what I was thinking that same thing. What's the difference?
Yeah. So it depends on that sort of stuff too.
I should make a HyperDoc on how to do a HyperDoc for the kids.
Oh.
They got so lost.
Yeah.
You know, looking for images or one video led to another video that led to another video.
Yeah. So there are some things to watch out for with that as well, just like with anything. Let's see here. Interactive tours. So these are really cool, especially with people being at home. There's been a larger variety. Some different museums and historical places and things like that started to push more content online. These are just a variety of resources that I found that were near me for people that like museums and things that either were free online interactive tours or virtual tours, or were specific programs that you could get from afar. So you don't necessarily have to make a field trip to that place. So for example, the Indiana State History Museum has free tours that you can do. So like they have one at Mound State Park, where you can have a brief overview of the Mississippian culture. It's at certain times and you can sign up for it, and there are a variety of other ones as well. Sometimes you might have to pay a certain fee based on the number of classes that you have, but there's a lot of them that have more distance learning programs now. So if you don't necessarily have the time or the transportation availability to get there and back in a school day, you can maybe get some of the information still. There's a lot of videos on YouTube now that are 360 videos that maybe don't have information with them, but may be a way to kind of immerse students in what you're talking about. So if you're talking about elephants, or you're talking about the savannah or something like that, you could use a video like this, which might have to give some students a warning, because some students might like kind of freak out a little bit because the elephants do get like right there. It's not like violent or anything. Here we go. So like you can see the elephants there. I can click and drag on the video and kind of take a look around. And you could either do this on the big screen, or you could give students the option to watch it on their own. But the elephants will walk all the way up to the camera and will walk right by it. So it's a way for students to kind of see the elephants just kind of moving around, especially for like the younger grades. It's a way for them to kind of get immersed into it. And there are a variety of other ones too. So I found ones for social studies where people are reenacting a battle and you're there in the middle of the battle. So there's narration with it. They're telling you information about the battle, but you can see kind of how the two sides moved, what it might have looked like, and that's one of the ways that I use it in my classroom, is kind of taking the information that we've learned and kind of making it more experiential. Or like Colonial Williamsburg, they have they have two different videos where you can kind of click and walk through places, or Mount Vernon has one. There are a couple other ones where I just kind of leave them as extra things for the students who are interested or maybe get finished early to kind of take a deeper look at some of the information. And so like you can kind of look and see the elephants. I don't know, I got really sucked into this personally. Yeah. And there are a variety of other ones. So this is linked on a site that has a bunch of different like animal 360 videos. And there are some other ones where you can like go in the ocean and see 360 of like the fish and stuff. I don't know. I spent a long time watching these. And Jake, my husband, was like, are you getting your presentation together? I was like, I am. I'm doing research on the animals. He's like, I don't think that you needed to do all of that. But yeah, there's lots of cool ones. So like there's a Machu Picchu tour, which my students really found cool because you can kind of see how you're up high and it's a long way down, and the building skill. Mesa Verde has a video, and some of them aren't necessarily 360 so that you can click around, but just seeing that place through a video and kind of giving students the idea of what the area might look like. Oh, this is the Battle of Lexington and Concord one that I was talking about that I show my students. And then at the end, I just have a variety of other resources and examples of other products and how I might use them. So some of them, like Google Docs, most people are probably familiar with. It's just another version of Word. But I still included some in there, so in case someone was kind of curious on how else they might use it, there's information in there for Docs, Slides, Google Forms, Google Earth, Google My Maps, sites, and then some iPad apps. If there's SE next to it, it's a student example, either from one of my students or a previous year's student or a younger or older grade student, depending on what I had available. And then the next slide are extensions that I like to use. I put a designation next to it if it was free. Other websites that I like to use, or add-ons, just for some other resources in case anyone's looking for extra things. Are there any questions? I know there was a lot of stuff, but yeah.
Not a question, but if you're not familiar, Slides Mania.
Mm-hmm.
The lady is a genius and has created quite a large number of templates that can be downloaded either in a PowerPoint or a Google Slides format. And all of the stuff can be edited, and it's a blessing. And she's free unless you want to buy her a cup of coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Slides, that's a good resource.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
What's
ThingLink, that's the link one of the bento I showed earlier. I can't see from here. I think it's this one. So with ThingLink, there's you take a picture. Typically what I've done is I've had students take a picture and then they can put in little blurbs with information, either typed or you can do audio recordings as well. The teacher version is free, but the student one is paid for. So for like ThingLink, I had my students with their Native American project, they took a picture of their board that had like the model of their house with it, and then they just copied and pasted the text of their research that they had already typed up. Oh yeah. And then I had them read it so that instead of like them presenting it in front of a class, it was a way that they could share their learning with the other students and share it with family at home, because most of the project is done at school in groups, so families didn't necessarily. Yes, it's $35, I believe, for like 60 seats, or 60 like students. Oh, I just paid for it myself. Yeah, and it was $35 total for the 60. So, yeah. So I paid for it myself because I thought it would be. Parents like seeing projects like this, and since they do most of it in school and they don't get to share it with their parents as easily, or like the parents might have bought a lot of supplies that they sent in and are wondering what exactly is their child doing with the 60 sticks they collected last night, then they can kind of see that sort of stuff as well. Anything else? All right. Well, you can always look at this and let me know if you have any other questions. I try to keep it short because I know it's the end of the afternoon and everyone is tired and is ready to be done. All right. Yeah.
When does this get posted? You said it gets posted in the app.
It should be in there. If you look at the description, you should be able to hit the see more button, and it should be there.
Yeah, if you go ahead and get there.
Okay, perfect.
So much better.
Good. There's also a link in there to ditch that textbook, which has a lot of other tech resources as well, if you're interested.
Deeper down.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any awesome suggestions for writing, like things that you use?
We didn't use a ton of stuff in fourth grade with like we would typically like handwrite or plan out and then take it online. I've done some organizers.
I found that like for peer editing, sometimes it's helpful to use digital format. I haven't found like the perfect way of doing it. So
Yeah.
you have them.
Yeah, so they could share. There's the comment like feature that they could use.
I just didn't know
Yeah.
if there's any cool tech thing that I'm missing out on or something.
No, I don't really have anything. I'm not sure. Thanks for coming. Yeah, I don't really have anything off the top of my head. I don't know if
Yeah,
anybody
that's
else
totally
does.
fine. I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah.
Something that I've been like kind of thinking through.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
So I see Canva up there. Do you have the free education?
Yeah. So, and I haven't really, I just used it this year to design our postcards for the Lutheran School Postcard Exchange. I haven't used it much in the classroom yet before then because I didn't realize that there was an educational version. I've used it on my own before, but
I think a lot of our teachers just use the free version of Canva and then it shows that you can sign up as a teacher and get the whole, like, all of the cool things. for
yeah. Yeah, no, I'm excited to use that more often because I'd use Google Drawings, but it was kind of clunky and
Yeah.
it didn't really work the best.
Drop it and go. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to use that more.